and welcome at the another event of the Free Market Roadshow that we are calling Freedom Fights in Poland. We are co-organizing it with Warsaw Enterprise Institute and Student Association of Geopolitics. Thank you for hosting us at Warsaw School of Economics. Our moderator will introduce the panelists. I just wanted to say that it's a pleasure to have you here. We'll have two sessions, this one about EU and European Union autonomy, and the next one about deregulation, including experiences of Javier Milei, America, and other success and failure stories. If you're interested about the Economic Freedom Foundation, please find me in the coffee break. We can have a chat and I can tell you more. And now, to save the time, I give microphone to Sebastian Stadolak from Warsaw Enterprise Institute.
Thank you, Marek, and thank you for co-organizing this with us. We've been doing it along, of course, with the main organizers, Austrian Economic Center from Vienna, Barbara Kolm, who is the founder of AEC, is going to come soon here as well. I'll be short. I just wanted to say that we as Warsaw Enterprise Institute, and I believe Marek as well, we are taking part in all this deregulation effort that is taking place right now in Poland. We're trying to throw our ideas into the basket, and we hope that the government will really use them, and that this discussion will contribute to the Poland going into the right direction, maybe to the direction of the deregulation as it is done in Argentina when they when they eliminate two different regulations per day. So I think that this is a good ideal to aim for. I will not be speaking much longer, just the same as Marek. If anybody of you wanted to know more about Warsaw Enterprise Institute, you're welcome to approach me. I'll be here whole time. Thank you so much.
And also on my behalf, because I'm speaking also on behalf of the SCAN of the Students Association of Geopolitics, Ideas and Society, I am really happy that we managed to do that event with two of you guys and with these organizations. We believe that we need a strong dialogue about different ideas, both from all the specters of the political views and so on, and especially about geopolitics in nowadays world. And yeah, just to sum up, we are really happy that you came here and we can help with hosting this event. Thank you very much for attending.
So, with all the welcomes being done, I'd like to welcome our panelists. Małgorzata Bonikowska from the Center for International Relations and the Think Tank Center, also a lecturer at the University of Warsaw. Mr. Marek Budzisz from both Strategy and Future and the Freedom Institute Foundation. Mikołaj Pisarski from Civic Development Foundation and the Mises Institute. And our guest from abroad, Jochen Richter from the Diplomatic Council, a lecturer at, amongst others, the University of Luxembourg. So I will be coordinating this panel. I'm the founder of Geopolitics, Ideas and Strategy Society at Warsaw School of Economics. So from, let's say, the broader strategic perspective, I'd like to ask our great panelists, starting from the right, to describe what, in essence, is strategic autonomy, what is strategic independence, what are the nuances between these, and how we ought to understand this. So let's say 2 or 3 minutes to introduce the subject.
Thank you very much for this question. It's an excellent question, actually, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. I am not so sure if we already know what strategic autonomy means. It's a term which started to be used, but in different contexts. And I think still many people, many politicians in many countries would understand something different by this notion. To my understanding, what I feel it should be understandable, especially now when we have these challenges all over the world, and Europe is going under a severe reflection how to face these challenges. I would understand strategic autonomy as simply a call for Europe to be more effective and stronger. Not against anyone, not because of somebody, but just because we Europeans think that it's high time to do that, to do so. Because time have changed. European project, the best times were in the 90s. Now it's definitely a very challenging environment. For something here, like European Union, it's a complicated situation because it's not a country, it's not an organization, it's something in between. When I teach my students about European Union, I always compare it to Warsaw Mermaid, half woman, half fish. So we don't know what it is, and it's very difficult to understand how it works. It was working quite well in good times, but in bad times, it's too slow, it's not effective, it's a complicated bunch of leaders who have to agree, and they very often disagree on many things. So the European Union needs a reform. By the way, we wrote a report on that. There is a Polish voice on this topic, the Better Europe report, by the independent group of Polish experts. And I think European autonomy, strategic autonomy, is just a call for that. In the same time, having said that, I know, and you also know, that it could be also another interpretation. So I think we are under discussion how really to finally describe this notion.
Okay, so Mr. Marek.
Thank you for the question. I do understand that, first of all, we are talking about the strategic autonomy, not only about the European strategic autonomy. So in my opinion, by definition, there is no strategy without autonomy or without sovereignty. That means that this term, very often using European strategic autonomy, is internally, in my opinion, contradictory. Because the main problem we have in Europe is a problem of how to define, how to treat the potential risks and how to create the answer. Because we have the different perspective, what is really risky, what different threat perspective, and that helps us understand why in Europe we have different answers to this question. And in my opinion, the answer is relatively simple. Without the unified entity, there will be no strategic autonomy. And that means that, frankly speaking, we have, theoretically of course, two ways. The first, to reach the level of unifying all the European countries, in my opinion, more theoretically is possible than in reality could happen. And that means that the only realistic way is trying to find a solution how to improve our national position inside European Union and cooperating with other countries in Europe, not looking for an theoretically only possible strategic autonomy of Europe.
So just as Professor mentioned, neither of these terms is part of what we would call an agreed vocabulary in the diplomatic speak. So when diplomats of the EU countries talk to each other, there is no agreed understanding of these two terms. And we can begin to try to conceptualize them by disentangling them from each other, because they both have a specific origin and they have slightly different meaning, which is being ironed out in the unofficial setting of the European discussion. So first is the question of the European autonomy, which circa 2013 began to circulate. At first in the document, we find it in 2016 in the global strategy of the EU. And it has this broad, vague definition, which I kind of enjoy for the purpose of our discussion. It is ability of the EU to act together with other countries when possible, but also act alone when it has to, which kind of reflects the traditional approach of the EU to its relation with the external world when we were mostly focused on the question of trade, rather than military, energy, and more pressing security matters that we feel the weight of now, especially in Poland. The other term, strategic or European sovereignty, this one has also a very concrete origin. It's 2017 and the speech of Emmanuel Macron. And this one, if you remember, was received with fear, if one might say, in the diplomatic community, because there were at least three objections. The first was the traditional bid of the French statecraft to use the rest of the EU as a leverage to level up the global position and the scope of operation of France. This was always a fear in other countries which we had to kind of resolve within the EU basically from the very beginning. It goes all the way back to Charles de Gaulle and even before that. But also what Macron did was he introduced into the discussion the vision of European sovereignty also in the military sphere. And this, especially in our part of Europe, was met with a fear. And this was the first large objection to both of the terms, which makes us reluctant to accept them in this agreed set of vocabulary, that this would drive the America out of Europe. And we clearly do not and cannot allow this to happen for many, many reasons that we don't have the time to dig into. But there are two other important reservations about both terms that we should pay special attention during this freedom fights, after all. And these are two threats of possible incompatibility of the European autonomy and especially European sovereignty with the parts of European acquis, especially referring to decentralization of power and external, and I will stress this out, external approach to trade. Because EU was built as a free trade project. It was built in direct opposition to protectionist barriers. And now there is this great push and pull, whether we will remain or whether we will be able to retain this part of our acquis and this common European identity built on the free trade, both internally with the free market, but also especially in relation to the external countries, or whether we will be forced to adopt some or all protectionist measures which are getting more and more popular right now. So these three objections help us conceptualize these terms. A fear of driving America out, a fear of centralization of power, and fear of adopting or changing the course from free trade to protectionist measures.
Okay, so now Mr. Richter, as the last, let's say, statement to start our discussion.
Thank you, first of all, for allowing me to be here. It's mainly thanks to Professor Bonikowska, with whom I had a nice exchange. Now, to this whole question, sorry for a little bit advertisement, there are a lot of answers in this book that we have published with 21 authors who go through different challenges that we have at the moment in Europe. Now, I need to start with my neighbor here, because I loved some of the keywords he was throwing in the room. And the main word I heard here, fear, fear, fear. It's not a good advisor when we are thinking forward. The European Union was never established only as a free trade zone. That is a too narrow interpretation. But leaving aside, I agree with you, Professor. we have no clear definition what we want under strategic autonomy or independence. Maybe if we start from the other way around, what is it not? When I got my first car 45 years ago, which was my father's car, there was, of course, no security belts in there. There was no airco or any fancy things that we all have in our cars nowadays. So a car that was, of course, quite costly at the time compared to our income, nowadays is still relatively expensive, but it costs, let's say, on average, I'm just throwing a number in the air, something like 30,000 euros, because we have all this global supply chain, with work being outsourced, others are calling it globalization, because otherwise this car would cost probably something like 100,000. And as the Americans themselves now in their discussion about their own position find out, as you could read in the newspapers, even the F-35 relies to quite some components inter alia on European suppliers. So any ideas of what was now called in American newspapers the American-produced iPhone, allegedly then costing $3,000, is completely illusory. So to which extent can we realistically be independent? So then I come back to the good points that were made earlier, namely a much better, efficient cooperation. So what would be necessary? It's no longer to look at our wonderful national naval point. And I give you two examples just out of the very recent days. So yesterday, the new German chancellor was visiting the French presidency. And the conclusion is, yes, of course, the German-French cooperation in security matters is solving all the European problems. I thought there is for a while already something in the play that is called Weimar Triangle. So where was the Polish element in this? Where was the reference to the cooperation with the United Kingdom, Norway, and a few others to name? Yeah. Nothing of this. And minutes later, when the chancellor had left, the French president met the new Syrian leader. Some would say he met a terrorist. Fair enough. But conclusion is that the French will have a harbor project in Syria. It's not a European project, because that would, of course, make so much sense that we have a foothold maybe also in this area. So I think we are hampering ourselves, besides the many elements that are in this wonderful report. Please read it very carefully. What we need to do in new approaches of European cooperation, we need to end to see constantly only our national interests. Yes, in the discussions, we have to have a strong Polish voice and saying, here's a red line where we think we cannot step over, and that needs to be part of our discussion. But when we look for solutions, I think if we don't start always to see only the points we disagree and start to work on also quick wins, final sentence, quick wins. We are in a war with Russia because I consider us as Europeans not having Ukraine only being at this war. Why has nobody started already 3 years ago, for example, to do away with 19 hook systems for the military vehicles? Yeah? If I come with my German car, I still have the passport, but I live somewhere else, leave alone, and go to the Netherlands, I cannot pick up the military hangar. Yeah? This is always appalling. Who has sat down and measured the landscape of our transport possibilities across Europe? When I was a child, we had at every bridge a sign, this tonnage can pass. It's all gone. So we are sitting 3 years in a war situation and do nothing about this. That is very sad. So there we could start to do practical steps for much more independence.
So maybe as, let's say, a question onto the decentralization element, which is directly related to how we ought to view strategic sovereignty. I'd like to ask Mr. Pisarski, how far should decentralization go in the aspects of strategic autonomy? Should we go into regions, national states, or even lower?
I believe to properly answer this question, we first need to grasp the magnitude of the challenge ahead of us. Because now the tariffs are all the big talk in the room. But we've had this thing called Draghi report quite recently. And Draghi was quoting a very interesting data from the IMF. Because internal tariffs are non-existent in the EU, external tariffs very low. But if you look at the regulatory cost and the cost of the overhang of the barriers even to the trade between the countries inside the EU, you can, of course, with some methodological caveats, kinda average the cost of this regulation. And the IMF cites that for manufactured goods, they are equal to about 40% tariff. And for the services, a whopping 110% within the common market of the EU. These are insane rates. Even if Trump were to introduce tariffs that high, there would be a global outcry. And we, after agreeing on the common market, we still have these internal country-specific regulations that amount to a much higher cost, which are limiting the potential of the EU to innovate, grow, and build new things, which are the main challenge if we are to achieve this vague concept of autonomy or a more specific concept of sovereignty. Because, of course, I completely agree, there won't ever be a situation in which Europe is able to build everything. This, as we as free marketeers know, it's a vague dream to even try to strive for autarky. But we can build so much more as Europeans. Both population-wise, we are a larger economy than the US. And we can be a very impactful global player, and we do not have to give up our acquis, which points towards decentralization and towards internal trade. We should begin to treat our acquis seriously. And this is the great challenge that not free marketeers, because it's hard to accuse Mr. Draghi of being one, posed to each and every one of us. Our job is to hold the political class accountable. Because to me, this is the greatest challenge. Of course, I'm outside of my field in terms of military aspects or energy aspects. So I will gravitate towards economic issues. But I believe, and maybe someone will prove me wrong, that there isn't a plausible situation in which Europe can become completely military independent in the short or even medium term. But economically, we can definitely start punching much harder, because now we are basically limiting ourselves with this overhang.
Professor Bonikowska, in relationship to what was said already, i.e. that the EU ought to be more, let's say, open to, let's say, building within Europe, building relationships between countries, allowing for more free trade, allowing for, let's say, more freedom, as we're sitting here doing freedom fights. Do you believe that the main reason why the EU cannot become more coherent as one entity is because of different political cultures, because of, let's say, strictly the current administration within Brussels and Strasbourg? Or what do you believe are the main reasons why right now it is so hard for the EU to become, let's say, more manageable, less managed, and more open to growth?
Excellent question. You know, European project is an old project. It's 75 years, and it evolved with the time, so it had different stages. European communities were more focusing on the economic aspect. This was a visionary project to do the common market, and this was not easy to achieve. It took Europe really 40 years almost to get there. There was another step once the Cold War was over. There was euphoria that in the 90s everything was possible. So this was this momentum that we even thought, or maybe let's better say they were thinking, because Poland was not yet the member state, to create a federation or confederation, right? This is how Euro was born, as a very visionary project. And imagine how difficult this was for countries like France or Germany and others to give up the national currencies. for a very visionary idea that we can create a European Union with a single European currency, which was completely new from the scratch. And in 20 years, it proved to be one of the strongest currencies in the world. This is a huge achievement. Another step was enlargement. This was also a very visionary, you know, using the momentum that we were able in Eastern Europe, Central Europe, and Western Europe to join, right, and enlarge. But now it's a completely different moment. So we know three things. One, that there is no appetite for creating any confederation or federation. It was rejected, this idea, in the referendum in the Netherlands and in France in 2005. So two founding member states rejected, the population rejected. Many of the elements of the constitution of the EU was put in the Lisbon Treaty, but we know that number two issue is that there is no way really today to open the treaties. There will be too many problems between the states. And number three, that the environment around the EU and even inside the EU is very bad. So in these circumstances, the thinking has to be more adapted to the realities, very realistic approach. And the realistic approach is that I think with the Trump from one side and with the Putin from the other side and with China also in, you know, not so far away, we are confronted with new powers, and we were confronted with politics of power, hard power and interest. So there is no more value-based politics. There is no more, you know, talking about democracy or not democracy, more for more. You want to cooperate with Europe, only you can do it when we, you know, we will push you for the reforms. So all these things are over. Now the European Union and the European leaders face the harsh reality that democracy is in minority, that new powers, some of them are not at all democratic, and then we have to, instead of thinking about putting the order to the whole world, we have to put first the order to our own internal organism. And I think it's extremely difficult, but on the other side, we are extremely pushed towards that. So I think, you know, European project was always evolving from one crisis to another, reaching certain next steps. So maybe this is a serious crisis, or polycrisis, how we call it, which could really push Europe into a new energy, into a new list of decisions, which will put us into more autonomous and effective group of countries.
Professor Richter, let's say, paraphrasing what Professor Bonikowska said, how should the United Europe clean its room? How should it first manage itself within to go forwards and start to then possibly think externally?
Well, the fascinating thing, and insofar I not 100% agree with you, we have at this moment, if we look at where we are saying the ambition is, certainly when you go to Kiev and talk to these people, but also to some Balkan countries, we have exactly the same questions on the table that we had in 2000 before the enlargement 2004. I was at the negotiation table when the agriculture reform that was a total failure in 2000 was negotiated. And the question how to reform these big money pots and what does this mean for having a stronger industrial orientation is still on the table, and we even don't want to talk about it. Because I fully understand this is a crucial question also for this country. What do we do in this sector? Should that avoid us from picking up the issue that the policy cannot remain as it is? I don't think so. But this is just one of the many elements. And again, I loved reading in the airplane this wonderful report. But coming back to the question of how to unlock more economic cooperation and better cross national borders cooperation. You know, when I was working back in the 1990s in research, basically the wonderful, still existing European IT was breaking down. We had extremely well-placed companies, Olivetti and some others that we still vaguely remember from the time. So why was this all crumbling? Not because the Americans were so much better, but we didn't jump over the border of saying this means bringing the real powerful companies together and create European champions. A lack until today of proper handling of risk capital, because we already don't like the word risk, but in any economic activity there is a risk. And the third element, and there I'm totally with you, was an incredible amount of administrative burden on which we need to urgently attack. Whether it's so easy as I seem to hear it in the beginning, that we just take the chainsaw and destroy regulation, I'm not 100% convinced, but that deserves a much longer discussion. So I was sitting this morning over the Financial Times and read with interest that TechEver, a big drone producer from Portugal, and Quantum from Germany, they are now the front runners in this business from a European perspective, something that we need in Europe, and Ukraine needs this. These guys were able to assemble $1 billion in terms of funding. So will to be seen in a few months from now whether these guys are still alive, or we see already that they are thinking towards moving to the US. And I think we have to do a hard work to keep them here in Europe and to do everything that they become important players in this market.
Thank you, Professor. Mr. Budzisz, in the context of what was said about the EU being much less capable of using market mechanisms than the EU, what do you believe is the first cause, the main reason why the EU is so bureaucratic? What are the most practical reasons as to why it's so hard for us to deregulate? And from that perspective, do you believe that it is possible in the near future for us to replace the United States, our liability, us being reliant on the United States and switch to Europe from the perspective of the systematic problems within?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Because we are approaching harsh times, as Mrs. Bonikowska told, so let me be a little bit less diplomatic and more harsh. In my opinion, European Union was a good solution for yesterday's problems. And we are trying to using this tool for today's problems. The question is it possible or not? I think that everybody, as we're sitting here, we see the scale of the problems with this, and there is an understandable mechanism of replacing the pragmatic approach by ideology. We concentrate in our European discussion about the necessity of creating something more integrated. Doesn't matter if we call it federalization or renewing the European Union, something new. But in practice, I think we should be less ideologic and more pragmatic. Because if we are talking about the military aspects, there are to the bonds pragmatic, and everything is accountable and everything is predictable, more or less. And if we will be more pragmatic, we will be not looking about the general solutions, but we will try to build useful tools. That's the goal we should concentrate. That's my opinion. That's the first. The second, in these harsh times, we cannot separate the economic capabilities of European Union from the security questions, because that's not working this way. No of our rivals or even our friends will let us to separate and concentrate on one aspect. For example, hitting a little bit stronger in economic negotiations and be very polite in military or strategic. It's interconnected, and we should try to live in the new reality and in new times when these two aspects are related. That's my answer. We should be less ideologic, more pragmatic, trying to build useful tools. But if you are asking about what countries or what entities should participate in this process, we have no time, that's the answer, to looking for something new. We should try to use these entities we have, that mean national states. And if you consider the military policy of Germany, of France, Great Britain, even Spain or Italy, they are looking solutions which are best for their interest and their goals. Germans want to increase the national debt, and they are against the collateralization of European debt. France, the opposite. The difference is obvious. But that's the answer, how this policy is structured and how it is organized. And it's my opinion, because we have no time, because nobody of our rivals and our friends will not give us the comfort of preparing something new and looking the best solutions. We Europeans they had this time during the Cold War because of the American security umbrella. But just now we have this luxury position, we have no time, and we should now to look for miracle solutions. We should be more pragmatic, more goal-oriented, and more concentrated on the real risks. And of course, that's the last what I want to tell. We should to see the lessons of the Ukraine. If we are talking about the Ukrainian experience, there is obvious that the war between Ukraine and Russia is also the war between the free market solutions and the state-organized power projection. Ukraine is free market solutions. Russia is state-organized power projection. And if we compare the potentials of these two countries, so the only answer to the questions why the Ukrainians are still able to defend themselves is relatively simple. Because the market is stronger, and they believe in market, and they organize their military production under the market conditions. Just the opposite the Russians. That also should be the important lessons for European solutions. Market, more enterprise spirit, more competition, not the slogans of buying Europeans. For many, that's mean buying German and French production, but more open economy, more cooperation, and more pragmatic attitude.
Thank you very much for all of your answers. Now I'd like to open the discussion to all of our audience. If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand up. And very sorry. Okay, so thank you very much, Professor. And on that note, any questions from the audience? Okay, please, just out loud.
I have a question. In one opinion poll, the majority of Canadians choose also to potential joining to the EU. And I would say that the vision of Canada as the member of EU is realistic, but I have a question. Is Canada a
Okay, and was that question, let's say, put forward to all of the speakers or to? All. Okay, so if anyone would like to comment potentially on what Canada-US relations may and how the current situation may influence Europe's position, then please go forward.
I mean, sure, let's bring them in. I mean, Eurovision could benefit from including some countries that actually know how to sing. But the European project was always built on the assumption that more trade is beneficial to both sides of the engagement. And there is this great other definition of strategic autonomy that's floating around. It's the ability of the EU to live by its own laws. And if we adopt this mercantilistic vision that Donald Trump, I believe our friend still, tough friend, and our more and more, even more protectionistic enemies are tossing our way, we will lose it. There's no point in winning this game by adopting the flawed policies of the people we are rivalizing with. And EU has proven times and times again that this works. As I said before, all we need to do is treat our acquis seriously and this commitment that was made in the treaties, because it's all there. There is no need to invite new strategies or new concepts. We just need to kind of go back to implementing them in practice. Canada, I mean, welcome to the EU if I were to have a say. Sadly, I do not.
But you know, please remember that we have the idea of creating a common trade platform between the United States, Canada, and EU, and who was against this solution. That's mean that, especially if we are talking about Canada. Canada is most in the world, I think, connected country from the economic. If we are talking about the economy with United States. And the idea to separate the Canadian economy from the America and being a part of European Union probably is more political, should be treated as a more political slogan than the real goal. That's also the question of our understanding of reality. We are more talking about the declarations and political, completely artificial problems. For example, if Trump will leave Europe and when, and how it will be managed, or how it could be managed, and we do not concentrate on the real problems. That's also our problem of how we participate in the reality.
Okay. Any more questions? Sorry if I interrupted.
Yeah, I can't let this hang in the room just like this. I sense here an enormous sympathy for the political orientation of the new American administration, which, yeah, I take note of. I think it's a little wrong recollection that the Europeans were torpedoing TTIP. That was the Americans who didn't like certain developments in the discussions. Let's remember that. So Canada, I think, is a very interesting partner. The Americans, I think, are rethinking what their position is towards Canada at this moment, when you consider that the biggest crossing between the two countries has a traffic that is way beyond any of the traffic we have intra-community. And I think this was slightly overlooked when this interesting talk about having Canada as the 51st state of the US started. Now, coming back to the question that sits here in the room is, are we overburdening ourselves with too many regulations? On that front, I agree with many things that were said here. Is a simple free market approach with no boundaries, because also that I heard in preceding discussions, the solution to the problem. There I would be rather careful. Now, if you look at our current discussions with the unfortunate situation we have with Great Britain, then this has clearly shown that not only because of the situation we are in terms of regulatory procedures, that the Brexit was a total catastrophe for Great Britain, something they start to now finally to admit, even though they didn't hear it before. So all I'm saying is what I heard slightly here, but I hope I misunderstood you, sir, is individual national approaches are the way forward. In my view, is maybe not the way forward. We are all, as countries in Europe, too small to address the problems we are facing here. Certainly, if we look at security policies, if you think about the blackout we experienced very recently in Spain and Portugal, it is clear that part of the solution certainly is what France is blocking for a long time, namely a better connectivity. And of course, we have neglected for far too long the grids that are behind our new green world. I close with one remark, and that is to our inability to see things as they are. I was sitting the night before the war against Ukraine started with a think tank board, president, a former high-ranking NATO general in Frankfurt, 17 hours in the afternoon. This NATO general said in the room, yeah, I see what's happening there, but Putin will not be so stupid and start a war. Of course, they were calling him out of bed a few hours later in the night. Now, the fact of this is mentioned for the reason that exactly on the day, 20 years earlier, in 2002, February, I was at a conference in Potsdam at which the free Mr. Chodorkowski was present and a certain Mr. Medvedev, the name says something. The conference title was Western Integration of Russia. And since then, we have been living in dreamland for 20 years, including myself, and didn't want to see what was building up. So all I'm saying is, let's be very conscious of the challenges that we have in security matters, be it supply chains, be it energy, be it also climate change and others. We need a stronger cooperation. And there I'm totally with you. With less regulation than we have at the moment, I think we can reduce the burden drastically. This is a question of will. And it will be interesting. One showcase, in my view, in the next couple of months will be whether the data protection rules, where everybody says they need a revision, and nobody wants to go through a fully fledged legislative cycle that probably will take another decennia. Do we find a solution how to solve the issues? And everybody knows what we are talking about. Yeah? So the question is, are we this time clever enough to do this on a faster pace?
Okay. Are there any more questions? Coming? Czekaj, Maciek, czekaj.
With the aforementioned clashing concepts of autonomy and common European strategy, what do you think of the possible benefits and drawbacks of a theoretical expansion of the Eurozone? Would it help to align each country's mercantile interests better, or would it just kill off some maybe more struggling economies? Thank you.
You know, in my opinion, so my main field of interest is military strategy. So I think that I'm not the best person of answering this this question. If we consider the military aspects of our policy, frankly speaking, I see no benefits of looking of the solutions in this of the solutions like this, because that's not a main problem of Eastern European countries. The main problem of Eastern European countries is looking for the answer how to avoid a potential clash with Russia, or, which is also probable, how to avoid a potential changing of our security status. Because if we remember this Putin proposals of the agreements, there was a very openly written that there should be two Europes. First from the Central Europe, and the second of the West. And that's, in my opinion, should be the main question we should look the answer. And the problem with our potential difference of the opinion is that, in my opinion, Europeans from the West, they are looking the answer for the completely other questions that we are looking here in the East. And as long as we will not be able to find the common solution, all these miracles, all these dreams about the united Europe will be not fulfilled, because the security in these times are most important problem we should look for the answer.
Does adopting euro help us to live by our own laws? Does it help us to act alone when needed? The, I believe, overwhelming answer from the empirical evidence of the past years is no. And we have a great author in the room of the book Tragedy of the Euro. Please read it. We've translated it into Polish at the Mises Institute of Economic Education, that shows that euro is mostly the political project, not economic one. It had, at best, giving it the largest possible credit, very mixed results in the countries which adopted it. There is no clear set of data that would allow us to say convincingly that the countries which adopted euro were growing on average faster or had on average lower inflation than the countries that did not adopt it. To be honest, the other way is also, it's a mixed bag, so this says that something other is more important. I would point towards the regulatory regimes inside the countries. So I believe I can agree that talking about the euro right now is possibly one of the least important of important topics that we can discuss inside the EU. And luckily for us in Poland, it's now almost completely out of the question, although I know that Marek is doing his best to put this issue on the table, because we simply do not fulfill the criteria, so there is no talk about Polish adoption of the euro right now.
The Eurozone is open to any country who wishes to join, first. Secondly, the underlying issues that would have to be solved is the non-existing union capital market that we don't have, and also the necessary banking regulation is not in the state as it should be. Then the efficiency in the market also towards more risk capital would be much stronger than it is at the moment. Again, national interests are still prohibiting a much more integrated market. That would be then potentially also become a different story in terms of attractiveness to a country like Poland. Now, coming back on the security question, because of course this is the question number one. And I totally understand where you are standing, Professor. This is also the reason why I'm doing for the moment with this book a tour through Europe, because it is stunning the further you go away from this conflict line, especially when we're talking about Italy, where I will be in a short while from now, when we talk about Portugal or Spain. For them, this seems to be on a different planet. So part of me running around is also to say, guys, this is not on a different planet. It is even on the same continent, and it's only a few 100 kilometers, which means in terms of a potential attack, a few minutes. Because having been myself twice in Ukraine, I know what it means when you look at your app and say, Do I have to run or can I stay where I am? And this understanding to bring now to the other parts of Europe is hard work to make them understand that more cooperation is needed here and is possible, is totally possible. It does not mean completely giving up on America. And I think we will learn in June where the Americans really stand. I don't believe all the talk that we hear now, one day it's this, the next day, like now Vance in Munich, it's something different. At the moment, I wouldn't be able to say where the Americans really stand on the question how far they would go. Final sentence on this. We have this intensive discussion about the nuclear shield. Now ask yourself, would America risk a potential attack on its own territory if it would be serious, really serious, to defend us with its atomic weapons against an attack by Russia? Would they really do this? They never had to prove this. Never, ever. So let's be careful to assume what is there on paper would ever become reality. And insofar, I agree with all those who are saying the French shield is not an alternative. I'm not sure that they would risk an attack on Paris to help the others.
Okay, so just before we continue, how much time do we have left?
Like 2 last minutes.
Okay, so before the last advertisement, let's say 30 seconds to 1 minute each, as to let's say comment on the whole panel and to sum up the main problems that we are to face in the upcoming years when it comes to European sovereignty. And in that, of course, half a minute to answer Mr. Richter. So if we could start from Mr. Pisarski.
So there is no agreement inside the European community. What do these terms even mean? Those are being ironed out. It depends on us whether we will be successful in influencing them in alignment of the European acquis, thus fulfilling this definition of being able to live by our own law, or whether we will allow ourselves to give up on those foundational European principles and adopt more closed, more protectionist, more hostile to the market ideas that are sadly becoming as popular as last time on our continents, maybe in the 20s and 30s, 100 years ago. And the jury is still out. So we as liberals, the people who are fighting for freedom and meeting on the Freedom Fights conference, we still have a lot of heavy lifting to do. And even students, especially you. Your voice is important because this again is one of the distinct European qualities that Europe, with all the talk about the crisis of democracy, it still is a foothold of a not ideally, but functioning democracy which still can put a hold on the political bit to gain more power and turn our societies from open to close. So please help us protect this European acquis.
Mr. Bodzisz, if you may, thank you.
Thank you. You know, at bottom, a few remarks. If we are talking about, and if we are asking about the American credibility, especially in nuclear questions, the same questions should be put if we are talking about the French credibility. The difference between America and France is relatively simple. America is much more capable than France if we are talking about the nuclear deterrence. Of course, that doesn't mean that the America is much more credible, but theoretically has many more possibilities. France should, to be more credible, should change to the roots his nuclear doctrine. That's the way before of us. I don't I don't want to talk that we should not discuss about it. But this example is illustrating that we have a long way ahead and should be, as I told, much more pragmatic, looking very useful tools and be much less ideologically attitude. And in my opinion, today's discussion about European sovereignty is a completely ideological discussion without almost an relation to the real steps we should take. So that's my conclusion. Be more realistic, be more pragmatic, be more cooperative, and less ideologically motivated.
I like the words realism, and I take away from here that is an urgent need, much bigger than I think many of my Western colleagues would imagine to have East-West cooperation and discussion, even if they are very controversial. But I would like to come back to what you said and really say to those who are the next round of decision makers, please make yourself heard exactly in the way as you said. Whether you agree or don't agree with one or the other position, that is not important. But you are the next generation to take decisions. It's no longer up to me, turning soon 65, to decide what the world should look like. Yeah, it is really up to you. And that means, in the same context, that you need also to engage in contacts with other partners, with other universities across Europe, so that you make your case for what you think is important. And yeah, then you will have the same takeaways probably as I have already in these few hours here coming back to Poland, that there is a very different vision of how the world should look like. But we need these discussions urgently, and we need you in this. I'm time and again surprised that we have now all these defense debates, and I'm sure if some of you guys would meet some partners, whether they are from Germany or from Portugal or whatever, you would have some very interesting discussions. They would need a lot of alcohol and long nights, I would say. So thank you for having me here.
And thank you very much to all of our speakers, and I'd like you all to clap a bit. Thank you very much.
So we'll now have a short coffee break, so please enjoy the coffee, networking, and we'll start at 6:30 sharp with the keynote speech by Mr. Grover Norquist, and then the panel discussion on the second topic. Thank you. Free Market Roadshow event organized by Economic Freedom Foundation, Warsaw Enterprise Institute, Student Association of Geopolitics, and Austrian Economic Center. And before we will hear our keynote speaker, who is here, I would like to ask Barbara Kolm, who brought Free Market Roadshow to Poland many years ago, to have short remarks, and then we'll hear the keynote, and then we'll start with the second panel.
Thank you very much, Marek. I don't want to keep you much longer, but since there at least were a couple of young people here, and one of the main topics right now in Europe, and that is what we have been discussing with the Free Market Roadshow, is not only Hayek's warning that he gave 80 years ago with the road to serfdom, but also another one, which was 50 years ago, his Nobel speech or his acceptance speech, when he was talking about the pretense of knowledge. And both of those main messages are more than relevant ever, especially if we look to Brussels or towards Brussels. And we as Austrians are really very happy that Poland is chairing the EU right now, and that some voices of reason are being heard at the moment. But I would also like to give a real warning when it comes to the digital euro. You are safe right now. You're still on your own currency. But what Brussels, especially the Commission, is planning with regards to the digital euro is kind of a very transparent individual and citizen currency that will be programmable, that will be in the hands of the central bank and the politicians in Brussels. And as somebody who believes in individual and entrepreneurial freedom, I think we need to have a very close look at that, especially given that there are private alternatives already. So if you want to pay digital and not use cash, which most of the young people don't do, but if you want to pay digital, there is private alternatives around already that are even European companies that are really very good on that. I don't need to make those announcements here, but you know that you're using them. And so the question is, why would it be the task of the European Central Bank and the European Commission to have the hands on our individuals' money, especially if we look at the initiative that Mrs. von der Leyen has raised, namely the Savings and Investment Union, where she, and I quote her now, said, we will need the much important savings by individuals and turn them into much needed investment for whatever big European projects. So I assume that everybody with sense knows exactly where he, she wants to invest his, her own money. And so I think we at least have to look at this from a very critical perspective, and we are glad that the Polish presidency is asking many questions with in those regards. So this was just a brief issue, a brief message that we have been discussing not only across Europe, but we also brought this message to the US. We did 12 stops in the United States. One of them was with Grover Norquist at ATR in DC, and when we were there, just the tariff issue exploded or imploded rather, so you can imagine that the entire tour in the US was dedicated to those topics. But without further ado, I hand over the microphone again to Marek, who will introduce Grover, and thank you all for coming, and join the family, and let's fight for more individual freedom. I think we all need it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And now something that was supposed to open the conference, but it will happen now before the second panel. So I would like to welcome Mr. Grover Norquist, President of Americans for Tax Reform.
Hi, Grover Norquist, Americans for Tax Reform. I want to talk on getting from here to there. It's fine to imagine what freedom is, how one would like to organize society and for a more free and open society. The question is, how do you get from here to there? And my group, Americans for Tax Reform, works on taxes And the reason we do that, and I have some handouts to put on your refrigerator, tape on them. This here, the bottom half is who runs the U.S. House of Representatives. The top one is who runs the U.S. House. The little line in the middle is who runs the presidency, which is the unimportant number. We set up the Constitution not to have a king, and we didn't get a king, and so Congress runs everything. Presidents like to pretend, but Congress decides how much to spend, how much not to spend, how to tax, how not to tax. Tonight I've been fielding calls because the House of Representatives is going to decide whether the president's budget goes anywhere or not. The president's lobbying the Congress because the Congress will decide. And on this, you'll notice on the blue, the Democrats had majorities from 1932 here to the yellow line, 1994, 62 years. The Republicans controlled Congress for 4 years, 2 years under Truman, 2 years under Eisenhower. We had a one-party state in the United States, okay? Presidents can veto things, that means slow it down. Then when Nixon leaves, they do what they want. And when Eisenhower leaves, they do what they want. And when Reagan leaves, they do what they want. So Congress is in charge, and for 62 years, we basically had a one-party state that slowly but surely made the government get bigger and bigger and bigger. So what happened? 1994, that yellow line, my life work. I get people to sign the pledge for America that simply says, I will never vote for a tax increase. And in 1994, 96% of the Republicans, and we don't have sort of party positions and whips the way some parliamentary systems do. You run on your own. You technically run as a party, but you can do pretty much anything you want unless you get defeated in a primary. So everybody has to make up their own mind. 96% of Republicans signed a pledge never to raise taxes, and that's when Republicans started to winning control of Congress, House and Senate. For 18 years, since 1994, the Republicans had the House and the Senate. 18 years. And 6 years, the Democrats had the House and Senate, so 3-1. We went from being completely irrelevant, the Republicans, to being not dominant, but winning more often than not and being in charge more often than not, and that changed. One of the parts was when you have a party, when you have a movement, you need to make it clear what your position is. What was the Republican Party's position between 1932 and 1994? Well, we probably don't want to do as much as the Democrats, and when they spend too much money, we'll go out and steal the money for them to spend. So we'll be the tax collector for the welfare state. So you're the particularly unpleasant person in this duo. One person's going, goodies for you, and the other one's going, I'm not going to take the money to hand out the goodies, and it was not a successful program. As you build a political movement, as you build a party, I strongly suggest having the one thing that everybody knows about you. Doesn't mean you get to win all the time, although taxes are a pretty good issue to work on. Although you'll see here, the Republicans lost in 2006, 2008. So if you invade small countries you can't pronounce, you can sometimes lose elections as well, which they did. I would also point out, and Europe sadly has lost much of this, but not all of it, and that's the power of federalism. We have 50 states, and these states are very different. There are two different maps on the states. Who runs them? The red states have a Republican governor in both houses. So if the Republicans all agree, they can do pretty much anything they want in the red states. The blue states have two Democrats running the House and the Senate and the governorship. Yellow states, the Republicans run Congress, legislature, but not the governorship. And green states, the Republicans have the governor, but not the legislature. So green states want to be blue, and yellow states want to be red. That's how the country divvies up. What does that mean? It means you have 50 states moving in different directions. The green states here have no income tax, no state income tax. The yellow ones have a flat rate income tax, a single rate tax, very difficult to raise, very easy to reduce. And our friends with the dots on them, the black dots, that is where the leadership of the state has decided we're going to zero. And they've passed a law to begin the process of moving down to zero. Louisiana is automatically going to zero over the next 10 to 15 years, so is Mississippi. North Carolina's halfway there already. West Virginia's triggering down to zero. As revenue comes in, they cut, instead of spending it all, they cut taxes a certain amount, so it just keeps going down until you get to zero. They don't move the income tax to some other tax. What they do is they don't spend the money, and they leave it in people's hands. West Kentucky is triggering to zero. West Virginia is triggering to zero. I spoke yesterday to the governor of Oklahoma. They're one vote away from triggering to zero as well. And all the black dots are on track to get to zero over the next 15 to 20 years. What happens in the United States, people move from the blue states, they move to the red states. That means political power moves to the red states. That means jobs move to the red states. You hear Trump whining, oh my goodness, we're losing all these manufacturing jobs. We aren't. Michigan is. The manufacturing jobs are leaving the unionized areas of the country and moving to the areas with free labor, the areas that have right to work, and you can't be forced to join a union. So there are just as many people in manufacturing as you would expect. There's a secular decline in the same way there's a secular decline in agriculture over the last 200 years as people get more productive. But in the states, they're moving from one state to states that tax them less, regulate them less, and give them more choice. So that's the backdrop of the US. I'll give you the American example and put it in your own mind, in your own neighborhoods, areas, and countries. Our two coalitions, on the right is a Leave Us Alone coalition. We have a meeting in DC, and I know you guys in Warsaw are looking to put together a similar meeting. There are 18 others in the various countries. There are 50 in the United States and 44 different states, where we simply sit around in a circle and everybody talks about what they're doing to promote liberty in their project for 3 minutes. You talk only about the future. You talk only about what you're doing. You're not allowed to assign anybody else work. You're not allowed to tell everybody else what you wish somebody would do. You're not allowed to regret everything gone to Hades since the Reformation. And, okay, what are you doing? What are you doing moving forward? And perhaps how can people work together? In the United States, the coalition is a coalition of people who, on their vote-moving issue, they wish to be left alone. So you probably hear about the United States people who focus on wanting to be able to carry a gun. In 27 states, you can carry a gun concealed, no permit necessary, constitutional carry. The cops ask you about it, you say, I have the Constitution, back off. Okay, meaning, whereas before that, 46 states have concealed carry with a permit, where you go in and they have shall issue permits, meaning you go in, you ask for the permit, they give it to you. They can't say no, unless you're a criminal or you're insane or something, but then you get the permit, which is to say there are a whole bunch of people who care deeply about that issue, and they vote often on that issue. So they're in the room, but they don't run the show, but everybody needs to know that this is a group of people who homeschool. We have about 5-6 million people who homeschool in the United States. I know the Germans put them in prison, but we think they're the guys who end up with all the best educations and do quite well, and are expanding the number of people who homeschool in the United States, and it is a political movement. Always be on the lookout for political movements inside your country. Homeschooling is a relatively new one. We used to put people in prison for homeschooling as late as 1986, for crying out loud. And in all 50 states, they beat the teachers' union. I want to party with a political movement that can beat the teachers' union in all 50 states. There's serious political movement there. Taxpayer groups, like the one I run, we have taxpayer groups in every state. What do they want? Do they want other people to pay taxes? No. They wish to be left alone on what they do. People who work on religious liberty, evangelical Protestants, conservative Catholics, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, Mormons, people who want to be left alone to practice their faith and transmit it to their kids. They don't agree who gets to heaven or why, but they all wish to be left alone. And so everybody in the room can work. We're not in conflict with each other. The guy who wants to make money all day and not be taxed and not be told what to do, and the guy who wants to go to church all day may both look over at the guy who wants to fondle his guns all day and say, that's not how we spend our time. Not necessary that we agree on how we spend our time. We're a political movement. We're not twins. We're not one group. And as long as, you're going to leave me alone, I'll leave you alone, we can all work together and build a coalition. The left in the United States is more likely to be found in most other countries, and that's the takings coalition. People who benefit from state power, people who are government workers, big city political machines, the two wings of the welfare movement, the people who are locked into welfare dependency and the people who make $150,000 a year, managing the dependency of people, making sure they don't get jobs and become Republicans. And then you have all the coercive utopians, the people who want to make the light bulbs so that it convinces you have glaucoma, And on the Sabbath, you have to separate the green glass from the white glass from the brown glass for the recycling priests, and it just, and the people who tell you that you have to have toilets that don't flush completely. And they have a list of rules that they want to impose on everybody, which is slightly longer and more tedious than Leviticus. It just goes on and on and on. So that's a group that can only agree on one thing. Everybody wants something from the government. And my insight here was that if we simply didn't leave as much money in the middle of that table for them to take, there would be fewer of them. And every time we cut taxes and reduce the size of government, somebody has to walk away from that table or get pushed away by the other groups, because the left is not, in the United States, it's not made up of friends and allies. It's made up of competing parasites. And if he's taking $1 off the table, I'm not getting it. And so at some point, they become competitors. That's why we do the no tax increase pledge, which then led to a Republican Party, which instead of being not a player at all, is now more dominant than not. And right now we have a Republican president and both houses, but as long as you have both houses Republican, you get to run much of the country as you move forward. So with that, I would just do two other things. As a political movement, a lot of people go, what's the matter with that politician we elected? Why doesn't he have a backbone? Well, the problem with people is you can't see their backbone. You don't know if they have a backbone. You don't know how good it is. But what you can do is create an exoskeleton, right? Clams have exoskeletons, and lobsters do. Politicians need them. They need you and the movement around you to help hold them up and strengthen them when they're in a battle with other people about how to get stuff done, because you get a lot of pressure, people attack you and call you names and go after you. You need to create the atmosphere that allows a political leader to stay strong, an exoskeleton on the outside, and you can see that, and you can create it. So you can either say, I wish the politicians would all be strong and have backbones and do what I want them to, or you can help make that possible by creating the atmosphere and the political situation that makes it easy for them to do that. And the last thing I'd leave with is when you're building a political movement, everybody knows what a Venn diagram is. You have the three big circles, and in the middle is the overlap, okay? In a political movement, you want to say, I want everybody who believes in A, and everyone who believes in B, and everybody who believes in C. I want, if you believe in A, or if you believe in B, or if you believe in C, I want you in my movement. That's the big picture. The little thing in the middle, where everybody has to be all three things, you have to be good on guns and taxes and something else, well, that's the small group. You don't run political movements with everybody agreeing on some 20-point manifesto. You run broad political movements with 20 different structures and groups and leaders and so on who each care about their issue, but understand that you can work together to have freedom for everybody, and that means all 19, 20 people work together. So structurally, that's how I recommend organizing, and I now hand this off to who?
Thank you, Grover, and welcome for the second panel. And I invite my speakers, Philip Bagus, welcome. So Philip is a professor from Madrid. Is Universitat Rey Juan Carlos, I hope I pronounce it well. And he is author of numerous books, among which we have The Tragedy of the Euro, and the newest one, the Milei's Era, which is soon on the Polish market. And next one is Aleksander Tokarev. Alex is an associate professor at the University of Northwood in Michigan. And the last but not least is Marek Skawinski. And he is the chief economist of the XYZ website. So we will talk about deregulation and lessons we can draw from Argentina and the US, mostly for Poland, but also for our region. And if we are talking about Milei, let me start with the quotation from him, from August 2023. I'm not asking for your vote to give me power, but I'm asking for your vote so that I can give power and freedom back to you, the people. So we are starting with Milei. And so the first question will be to our expert of Milei, so Philip Bagus. And if I remember correctly, Argentina went bankrupt at least 9 times in its modern history. It's been terrible disaster in terms of economy. And now we see a miracle because it is, the inflation is suppressed, there is a surplus in the budget, and there is no more fiscal deficit. From the outside, it looks like a miracle, but we, people who have more or less libertarian mind, we know this is a planned and well-thought strategy. So if you could explain us briefly, what were the key reforms of Javier Milei, how he did it?
Yeah, I think his, thank you, Marta, his most important achievement was to prevent a hyperinflation, because inflation rates were accelerating in 2023. The last government was spending everything in order to win the election, to buy votes. There was a 5% deficit in the government and a 10% deficit in the central bank, because the central bank was also issuing debt obligations in order to sterilize some of the money printing. But of course they had to print money to pay the interest on the debt obligations, so we had 10% deficit in the central bank and 5% deficit in the government, which means 15% deficit of GDP, which was financed by money printing. So inflationary expectations were rising. The monthly inflation rate was 25% in December 2023 when Milei assumed power, and it was accelerating. The producer prices were increasing even 54% per month. This is 17,000 per year, annualized. So you see that was close to a hyperinflation. If it would had become a hyperinflation, then you know what happens in the hyperinflation. There's extreme poverty, and it's extremely harsh on the poor, and there would have been riots, and probably the opposition would have used these riots to get Milei out of power. So what did he do? In a very short amount of time, he slashed government spending tremendously and got rid first of the deficit in the government and then second in the deficit of the central bank. Within 1 month, he eliminated the 5% deficit in the treasury, and until summer 2024, he eliminated the deficit in the central bank. How did he do that? Well, he slashed government spending. He slashed subsidies, transfers to the regions, to the provinces. He stopped all infrastructure projects, public infrastructure projects, and the subsidies to the media was stopped. So government spending was cut almost 30%. Yeah. Imagine what would happen. I can think of Germany, for instance. In Germany, like in half a year, government spending is cut 30%. The streets are burning, literally. It didn't happen in Argentina, and this is the miracle that he achieved this. But this was only achieved because 10 years he was in the media, on television, writing articles, on the radio, explaining libertarian ideas, explaining the causes of inflation and what would have to be done in order to get rid of it. So he explained what he would do if he would get to power, and he was elected because of that. And then he did what he promised he would do, and therefore he could cut government spending 30% without having riots. So then, as you said, then we have Argentina has a balanced budget or even a surplus. And this brought down inflation expectations because people knew that there is no more money printing is necessary to finance any government or central bank deficit. And as the inflation expectations went down, also the interest rate that the government had to pay on the debts, of course, went down. And the inflation rate has now come back to 2 or 3% per month, which is still very high, which of course is still caused by the money printing of the former government, and hopefully will be controlled in the past. So I think this is the most important thing that he did. He showed that it's possible to cut government spending 30% within very short time, without the like a huge economic crisis. Because what do Keynesians say? They say, well, there's aggregate demand. Government spending is part of aggregate demand. If you cut government spending, aggregate demand will fall. There will be less demand, so there will be unemployment. The workers will get unemployed. They will demand less. There will be like a downward spiral, huge recession, depression, huge unemployment. Did that happen? No, of course not. If 15% of deficit of GDP is eliminated, it means 15% of GDP that formerly was used by government. All these resources, 15% of GDP was used by government, suddenly became available for the private economy. And this opens, of course, huge possibilities for entrepreneurs to engage more projects. Stuff gets cheaper and so on. So the recession that had begun before Milei came to power, Argentina was in a recession when he came to power, in December 2023, came to a halt in May 2024, and from then on there has been economic growth. More or less 6% economic activity grew from December 2023 to December 2024. In the first trimester, first 3 months of this year, the economy was growing like 6%. Now it's growing at the rate of 8%. So it illustrates what we knew before, that if you reduce the size of the state, you open up the possibility for the growth of the private economy. Real wages are growing for all sectors. They have been growing 13% in real terms for all sectors. Only for government employees, they are still down in real terms. But for the rest, real wages are increasing. Private pensions are increasing. So it's a huge success story. Beside this, of course, there's the deregulation issue that he has done, or they have done 2,500 structural reforms. Some smaller, some bigger. Famous is, for example, the end of the rent control, which led to an increase in the supply of housing that before was not profitable to, of course, you can imagine if there's rent control and you are in an economy where the inflation rate is 10% per month or even more, and you are not allowed to increase the rent, then you don't rent it out. You get it out of the market. Supply decreases. So the rent control was abolished. Supply went up. Prices went down in real terms, 30% down. The air traffic was liberalized and deregulated and so on. Many small reforms. There's a whole ministry of deregulation led by Federico Sturzenegger, who deregulates on average every year, every day, like 3 or 4 regulations, which is amazing. There's like an online website where entrepreneurs and citizens can say, well, this regulation doesn't allow me to do my project. Can you do something about this? And then they look at it and then they try to deregulate it. So of course, this is also very important, the deregulation that he did. And all these successes, and this is even more astonishing, he did without having a majority in the parliament or in the Senate. They have only 15% in the parliament and 10% in the Senate. So the greatest achievement by him is to have reduced the size of the state and deregulate without having majorities in the parliament.
Yeah, that's true. So these are things that he has done very well, but he has also promised to close the central bank. Unfortunately, it's still there. Do you think it will happen? He will fulfill the promise?
I hope, of course. He wants to do it. I was 10 days ago. I was in Argentina, and of course he still wants to do it. The problem why he did not do it yet, or hasn't done it yet, is the following. He wanted to close the central bank using the dollar reserves to switch the pesos against the dollars, because the pesos are of course on the liability side of the central bank. If you imagine a balance sheet of the central bank, you have the assets, and you have the liabilities. The liabilities are the pesos, and assets you can have dollar reserves, but there was of course also Argentinian government bonds. So the idea was to sell the Argentinian government bonds and exchange them for dollars, and then swap the pesos for the dollars, and then you can close the central bank. Then the problem was that when he came to power, there were negative net US dollar reserves, so it was impossible to do. And on the liability side, there were these debt obligations, which were I think 4 times the monetary base, which were like very short-term debt obligations, like only on one day, and with an interest rate of 135%, because the inflation rate was so high. So the banks were buying these. They were not using the pesos in the economy driving the inflation rate up, but they were buying these short-term debt obligations because they got 135%. If you stop to give them this 135%, what do? Well, they'll use them in the economy, and it gets a hyperinflation. So you see how dangerous the situation was. So first he had to clean up the balance sheet of the central bank. He got rid of these short-term debt obligations and got them on the balance sheet of the national, of the treasury, on the government. And now he got also the dollar reserves, more dollar reserves by the IMF loan and other loans. So now the balance sheet of the central bank is more or less okay, but there's still other problems. One problem, for instance, is that we have a fractional reserve banking system. So if you just swap the monetary base pesos against the dollars, and you have fractional reserves, if there's a bank run, there are not enough dollars. So what should be done is to first establish a 100% reserve banking system, because otherwise there can be credit expansion, which leads to the business cycle, as we know, and there can be bank runs, and then something similar could happen as did in 2001, when there was the Corralito. And if something like this would happen, that would be fateful for Argentina, but also fateful, of course, for the political project of Milei. Then the whole libertarian project would be dismissed. That would be catastrophe, no? If there would be again such a corralito. So what should be done is to establish a 100% reserve banking system. But in order to do this, of course, you cannot do this so easily. You need to actually pass legislation. And therefore you need a majority in the parliament, and he doesn't have so. So as you see, there's still some steps that have to be done in order to abolish the central bank in a, let's say, orderly way, without giving rise to chaos or hyperinflation.
Fingers crossed for that. And next question is for Grover Norquist. So Milei is very often wrongly associated with leaders as Donald Trump in America or Viktor Orban in Hungary. But both Trump and Orban are more protectionist. But if you could say what Trump has in common, more or less, with Milei, and if his reforms can have similar effect on the US right now in the second presidency.
Yes, from a free market perspective, Milei is the full thing on every issue. He gets the free market answer. Trump doesn't understand international trade. He doesn't understand free trade. He doesn't understand that tariffs are paid, American tariffs are paid by Americans who buy things in America that other people sell you, that in trade wars, all of the casualties are friendly fire. The Americans damage Americans and the Chinese damage Chinese people by putting tariffs up on their own, against their own people, not against somebody else. And then somebody gets tired of getting beaten up by their own government and they quit the trade war. But this can last a long time. On the more cheerful side, he does understand the importance of reducing marginal tax rates, and he's serious about that. He's taken the corporate rate down. We used to be at 35%, stupidest in the world, now down to 21%, and he wants to take it to 15. We'll see if that happens in the next couple of days out of the House and the Senate. But he also understands the importance of going after the bureaucracy, one, because they're expensive. If we downsize the federal bureaucracy by 19%, in a decade, you save $1 trillion each decade that you do that, and we did that in 30 years ago. So it's been done. You simply 200,000 people quit every year. You just replace half of them, and in 4 years you've got the 400,000 down. And he's working on doing that, on deliberately reducing the number of government employees because they're very expensive and they last forever on the cost. That's something he's doing seriously. He also, the U.S. government, legalized unions in the federal government in 1978. Before that, not legal. 1978, they were legalized by Jimmy Carter. In that law, it read, you can't be in a union if you're in the Army, Navy, Air Force. You can't be in a union if you're in the FBI or the CIA. Or any agency or department the president says is key to national defense, and a union would get in the way. And I had been working for 10, 15 years on getting a Republican to pay attention to that piece of the legislation, and Trump did, just about a month and a half ago, announce that everybody in the Pentagon cannot join the union, everybody in Veterans Affairs, these are the two largest departments in the whole government in terms of personnel, the entire IRS, because they carry guns now, they decided to carry guns, rather expensive decision on their part, and basically 75% of the federal government is now union free. And as a result, they've defunded the structures that always lobby for more government. The government unions lobby for more government, lobby for more pay, lobby for less work, fewer days. In the United States, federal employees get paid significantly more, maybe twice as much as the average citizen. And that's not even counting how few days they work in the week, how few hours in the day, how few days in the week, how few years in their lifetime, and the pensions they get are something that nobody else sees. So deconstructing that is a huge saving, and having fewer government employees allowed to make decisions that should only be in the hands of Congress or the president will set aside a lot of the growth of the cost of government, the people who create all of these regulations that are rather expensive. So there have been some very serious, cheerful things. They've closed several whole departments down, and they've moved on several legal claims, which is the unitary executive, which is the president makes all the decisions. In the executive branch, you can't lend them out to some bureaucrat, which you can only really run a totalitarian state, a wildly powerful federal government, if you delegate to a lot of people powers that really only belong in Congress's hands. And that's what they've done with the bureaucracy. So pulling that back and saying, you know what, you don't get to make any decisions. And the law that they've put together, or the executive order, that says, we've got a new department. If you are in management, if you deal with policy, you are going to be what they called Section F. It's now going to be, it's got a new name. And you can be fired at will. So if you have anything to do with policy, if you think you're making decisions on it, if you're doing anything other than, doing work on, as you're told and getting something, mowing the lawn, if you're making decisions on how other people are going to live, you are part of this department and you can be fired for not doing what your supervisor or your supervisor's supervisor told you to, and then all of a sudden you don't have these pockets of power around the executive branch, which we have now, where government employees decide not to do, they decide to do what they want to do, and or not. So this is a deconstruction of a very powerful aristocracy in the United States. These people hire their children. They're like a regular aristocracy. You get your job through a credential, not through any talent, because you go to the right school. And it's self-promoting, self-perpetuating. Taking that apart is a huge piece of what Trump has begun to do in the first 100 days. Tried to do a little bit of that the first time, but he lost control of Congress, and he hadn't been there long enough to really have a sense of how to get it done, which is why it's so amazing what Milei's able to do. You know, first time in, he's pushing all the right buttons to make things happen. So those are the ones I'd point to. He's also busy defunding. The federal government in the United States gives grants to different groups. You've probably heard of Planned Parenthood, which people think has to do with abortion. They moved out hundreds of millions of dollars strictly into political stuff. Absolutely nothing to do with health care or abortions or anything like that. It's a political slush fund. And they're looking to defund that because it funds the structures of the left around the country. As much of the federal government, much of the left is funded by grants from the federal government. Pull those back and the American left becomes about 6 inches shorter to start with. So strategically, budget cuts, strategically telling people, look, you've got to do what we're trying to get done here. You're not allowed to go out and on your own decide that your federal job empowers you to go push people around. It doesn't. It has in the past, but it can't anymore. So I think those are some of the big ones. And they've got other ones which say, this executive order says that all other executive orders lapse every 5 years, which now means the bureaucracy has to go and redo each of the executive orders, regulations, and can be challenged. You know, you're redoing it for 5 years. Everybody who felt you did a lousy job the last 5 years comes in and goes, stop doing this. This is dumb. And all of a sudden, you've now got to rethink the regulation and perhaps pull it back a little bit. So a whole series of those, and that you've seen the hundreds and hundreds of executive orders that he's put out. Some of them are aspirational. I wish you'd do this, somebody. But some of them are very specific and draw blood.
Thank you, Gruber. That was American perspective, and now we are coming back to Europe. So the question goes to Marek Skawinski. And here in Europe, we have a lot of things to do our homework. And from your experience, you have been analyzing the Polish economy for a long time. And in your opinion, which are the sectors that need deregulation badly? I mean, like, why those reforms haven't happened yet? And I guess the most pathological sectors would be mining sector or agriculture. Which are, in your opinion, the most needed?
All right, so maybe I will start with a macro view, as I was the director of the macroeconomic policy department at the Ministry of Finance. So if we look at the international comparison of the product market regulations, so the sectoral regulations, so the OECD makes a review of 37 OECD members and 9 other countries. And if we aggregate all the sectors into one number, so generally Poland looks not so bad in this regard. So we have 10th place out of 46 countries in terms of less regulation in comparison with other countries. However, there are some places that we are lagging behind other countries, and there are in particular service sectors. So, for example, OECD usually points out the lawyers, points out notary firms. So, and in general, the EU, so maybe I will make one more general point, because you also said about the Europe. So if we look at what is, I think, the most hot topic nowadays, so tariffs. So the IMF has recently made an argument that if we look at the barriers between the Euro countries, they are much larger than in the US. So US has a large internal market with some state regulations, but there are, I would say, there are fewer regulations by the states in comparison with the EU national countries. And they have also made a comparison of how it would I would say transfer into tariffs. So if you look at the EU trade in goods between the countries, so the regulations transfer into 44% of tariffs between the countries. And in US, it is estimated that it is about 15%. And if you look at particularly at the EU, at the trade in services in the EU, so the regulations are as high as 110%. So there is a lot to do in terms of deregulating the service sector in the EU. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for that. Poland is still, let's say, champion of growth, or let's say on podium. But we remember, or some of us remember, harsh reforms from the 90s in Poland, and that was called shock therapy. And Professor Balcerowicz, who was responsible for these reforms, who made us actually great, is still hated by many here in Poland. So the question to Aleksander Tokarev is, which aspects of the Argentinian experiment are potentially replicable in Central and Eastern Europe, and how actually it was in Bulgaria after communism?
Before I forget, I'd like to mention something about Milei. We started with the idea of giving power back to the people. We have to be very careful how we interpret this. Power to the people. This is like a John Lennon song. A great musician, a very dumb philosopher. Power to the people. Who are the people? The only kind of people we have are individuals, like you and me. So if we want the power to go back to the people from the elites, okay, we certainly should not mean power to make collective decisions or democracy. Democracy should not be conflated with liberty. Okay, liberty is when you can make your own decisions regardless of what I think. Whether I think you're right or wrong, you don't need my approval. Okay, so we have to be in favor, as a libertarian, politically libertarian, I'm in favor of personal freedom. Okay, not in favor of democracy. Democracy is just another form of tyranny in which the majority imposes their will on the minority. Now, we also mentioned how Milei succeeded in such a short period of time to turn the country around. Well, I wish, right now, I wish that Trump had the same kind of executive powers that Milei enjoys in Argentina. Of course, one day when another Obama comes to the White House, I would wish that the White House would be severely restricted. Milei doesn't have hundreds of judges appointed by his enemies to obstruct him at every turn. And so Trump's job is way tougher than what Milei is facing in Argentina. Argentina was so much messed up that the people lend their support. In America, we suffer, but as one of my friends used to say, we suffer at a very high level. And so there is a lot of ruin that needs to happen before the people wake up and demand the kind of reforms that they are enthusiastically supporting in Argentina. As for the experience of transitioning out of socialism into capitalism, Poland versus Bulgaria, I wish we had someone like Balcerowicz. We had Kostov as our finance minister and prime minister eventually. These were not people with strong convictions. They dubbed themselves Democrats, but they were not followers of Milton Friedman. And so while Poland had the guts to go through these painful reforms in a short period of time, Bulgaria engaged in measures which led to very high levels of inflation, wiped out the savings of people. I was a millionaire at the time. A cup of coffee was 1,000 levs. And so one thing that Europeans should have learned from that experience of the 1990s is to never allow their central bankers, their governments that often control the central banks, to start with inflation. As Milton Friedman pointed out, inflation is like alcoholism. Okay, you enjoy it when you start. The bad effects come later. So it's very tempting to begin. When you try to cure inflation, again, it's like curing alcoholism, because when you withdraw from that substance, from dependence on printing more and more money faster and faster, okay, the bad effects come first. Okay, it hurts a lot. The country goes through a recession, high unemployment, a lot of pain, especially for the most vulnerable people, people on a fixed income like pensioners. And so the only way you can cure inflation with less pain is not to start it. Okay, just like with alcoholism, don't indulge. I know it's an easy way out when the government has made promises, when the government has borrowed. It's always tempting to, well, make more money faster to get out of it. And so, as Grover mentioned in his wonderful opening, we need to demand from the government not more democracy, not more ability to vote on more things collectively, imposing our will on others, but, well, leave me alone, as one of my friends, Art Carden, published this book with Deirdre McCloskey, leave me alone and I'll make you rich.
Thank you, Alex. Good that you mentioned central bank, because it reminded me of Philip's book, The Tragedy of the Euro, that actually mentions, the conclusion is that Poland should, that generally we should never take euro as a currency, and generally we should stick to our own currency. But the next question for Philip is actually how countries like Poland, so not big and also not small, medium size, could approach deregulation under the constraints of the European Union, because we don't have so much freedom left.
A good question. Let me first say something to Alexander. I agree that you can say that inflation is like alcohol. I don't totally agree with that if you stop it, you're hurting the poor. I would rather say if you continue, you're hurting the poor. The inflation tax is a tax that hurts especially harsh the poor. And when the inflation was reduced in Argentina, what happened was that the recession that was already occurring was accelerating, but only for 5 months. And it's true that the poverty rate went up like a few percent. It went up like 5% or so. It went up, but also because prices were freed. Yeah, before there were like price controls, and in the basket that calculates the inflation rate, they were with the prices, with the price controls, but you couldn't buy anything in the shops to these prices. Then they got rid of the price controls, and of course, prices went up, which meant that statistically the poverty rate went up because the basket went more expensive. But in real terms, it was the difference between having empty shelves or shelves with something that went up in price. So it was like just making explicit the poverty that were existing before. And after that, the poverty rate decreased. In the first 6 months of 2024, the poverty rate was 54.8%. and it fell very quickly in the second half to 38%. So reducing the inflation led to a decrease in the poverty rate. So I would argue that if you take back or reduce the alcohol, then it's actually good for the poor directly. Yeah. Yeah, okay, good. Good.
What scares people.
Good.
That's why alcoholics don't want the withdrawal. But
Yeah,
in the long run, it's good for their health.
Yeah. Of course, the relative prices are distorted by the inflation, which leads to huge malinvestments and waste of resources. And just by bringing down the inflation rate so much, you have seen that the economic growth of Argentina is accelerating so much. So your question on the deregulation in Poland and so on the European Union, yes, this is of course a very difficult issue here because much of the regulation comes from the European Union. Well, what you could of course do is to do institute a ministry of deregulation that concerns all the regulation that can be controlled in Poland itself. Yeah, and actually Federico Sturzenegger, he came into power with like 500 pages of laws that to be deregulated. He had spoken with the people who were affected and asked them, could you take a look on the law? How can it be simplified, or can it be abolished altogether? And they made propositions, yeah, like the regulated companies, yeah. And then he looked at them and adopted them or adjusted them. Yeah, so he came into power with all these deregulation projects, and then there was, as I said, this website where you could make proposals for deregulations, which I think is a great idea. And then they had also the internal review process where the government institutions were given 1 month to look on all the regulations that were respective themselves, and they had 1 month to look what would we need, yeah? Which regulation actually do we need? Because sometimes there's regulation that is like forgotten, that at some point in the past it has been introduced to give some entrepreneur an advantage over others to keep them out, and it's still there, and it's still hindering someone. Yeah, but it has been forgotten. So you look actually, what do you think as a government agency, what regulations concerning yourself is still needed? So and the rest, what you don't say, it's abolished right away. The big picture is, of course, this is related, what I said until now, it's all related on all the regulation that can be determined by Poland alone. Then, of course, there's regulation that comes from the European Union. But as I understand it, even though I'm not an expert, there's also some certain freedom of the different countries to apply these regulations. So you can apply it in a harsher way or a less harsh way, what comes from Brussels. So, and of course, there you can always try to make it the less effective as possible. And the big picture is, of course, to renegotiate the European Union, to come together with probably with other countries and renegotiate the whole European Union thing, to get rid of the idea to make it a big central state that regulates everything centrally from Brussels, and come back to the idea to have Europe as a free trade zone, nothing more. Yeah, because we don't need anything else than free trade in Europe. We don't need a central agency, a parliament in Brussels that regulates all details of economic life. That's not the European idea, actually. Yeah, the European idea is actually liberty and not centralization. So the idea is to renegotiate and say, basically, we go back to the idea of Europe as a free trade zone, with the central core value of liberty, or we end this project. Yeah.
Thank you, Philip. Grover wanted to add something.
I want to second that because I see Europe drifting backwards, and the big difference between Europe and the United States is federalism. We have 50 states, and they keep trying different things. That people in Vermont decided to have government-run single-payer health care, and they repealed it. Now they're still, the 2 senators from that state want to impose it on the whole country. They repealed it in their own state because it was too stupid for words. And in Massachusetts, before I emigrated to the United States, I used to live in Massachusetts, and there we had a Governor Dukakis who ran against George Herbert Walker Bush in 1988, and he said, I've passed in Massachusetts government-run health care, which was a series of mandates, and therefore, and we should do this in the whole nation. Okay? Hadn't really taken effect. He did pass it, that's true. Hadn't really taken effect. As soon as he lost the election, they went back to Massachusetts, and the left-wing legislature in Massachusetts and the governor repealed it. They had no intention of living under it if it was only going to be Massachusetts. They were intent on imposing it on the whole country. Truly stupid ideas in the United States can only be imposed at the national level. You can't take a truly stupid idea and do it in Rhode Island and then watch it move, because you watch it sink into the ground and everyone says, don't do that. So it's death to a bad idea to try it at the state level, but you wait until you have enough votes. You can maybe impose it on the whole country. Europe has only that one entry point for the really bad ideas and not enough ability to have competing thoughts. There are lots of good ideas that people find, and when you school choice, and I mean, we're reforming our healthcare system, our education system, which is a big government monopoly, by creating choice state by state, but you could never have done that at the national level, ever. It's going state by state. Right now, about 12 states have passed universal, and that's going to continue to grow. And that the best regulation, or the only good regulation, is competition. You know, you just let other people compete and show you what you're doing wrong, or you show them what they're doing wrong. I think federalism is so key as the alternative to the regulatory state.
Thank you. And Alex wanted to add
and to build again on something that Grover said at the beginning, how to build a winning coalition. Okay, don't try to write a comprehensive plan that everyone has to agree on 1,000 different tiny points. Just find one big thing that you know people will embrace and follow, that would leave everybody alone to pursue whatever they value. I believe that the single most important question we need to be asking, especially the panel that we have right now, is what is the government? What is the government? And again, I learned more economics from Milton Friedman than anybody else. He explains the government is an instrumentality, it's a tool. And we have different tools and we use them for different purposes. Think of a gun and a paintbrush as 2 different kinds of tools. What do you use a paintbrush for? I mean, you can paint your fence. You can't paint your fence with a gun. Okay? What is the gun used for? The government is represented here as a gun. What is the gun legitimately to be used for? I mean, you can tell me. For what? For protection, right? For the protection of our unalienable rights, life, liberty, and property. Well, maybe I can use my gun to stir my soup, but it's not very good for that. And so we have to limit what we use the government for. Shall we, there's a question, or shall we wait for the end?
There will be time for questions.
Time for
okay?
questions
Just,
later.
in 5
Well,
minutes.
I beg to differ. I think the government is the enemy. The government is the enemy that should be destroyed from within. The government cannot, the state cannot fulfill what it promises because it doesn't have the necessary information to do so. This is the problem of economic calculation that the Austrians have pointed out. They promise things, but they don't have the capacity to fulfill it. It's scientifically impossible. And government is immoral. It's based on violence, and coercion. So it's evil and should be abolished.
I think you overstate the case for a central government.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Overstate. I said that the government should be abolished.
Yes, I think you overstate the case.
For abolishing.
No,
Okay.
I didn't say. I don't understand your argument.
I'm agreeing with you, and I'm suggesting you're insufficiently radical. That's all. While you were thoroughly, I had a chance to meet with your guy Mikołaj, and I mentioned to him that the quotation that I've used publicly that's most associated with me is somebody from the National Public Radio, government-run radio station in the United States, said, well, do you want to abolish the government? Because I'd come close to evidently ruling out most of the government. Do you want to abolish the government? I said, no, I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it in size to where you could drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub. And when I told this to Mikołaj and said, no, I don't want to abolish government, I got the dirtiest look. He just looked at me with horror. I said, can I finish the sentence? And then it was okay.
Thank you.
Okay, good that you are on our side.
Okay, so last question because we are running out of time. We at the Warsaw Enterprise Institute have published recently new Bjorn Lomborg's book, which is Best Thing First, and maybe you know it, but he generally depicts how international organizations and generally states waste a lot of money to, let's say, solve the world's problem, but they do not solve the problem, and they waste a lot of money. And the last question to Grover Norquist is, what are maybe the most absurd examples of wasting taxpayers' money in America?
The post office with 400,000 plus maybe 600,000 employees, which could all be done privately. We do have private delivery for packages, and they do quite well. We also have email. When email came out, the post office wanted to nationalize it and make you send the email from one post office to another, and then they would deliver the email. That was their suggestion. The post office is probably the biggest thing that's kind of a wasteful mistake.
Polish one is even worse, I can say.
And state ownership of land. About almost half of the land west of the Mississippi is owned by the state, and they don't do very well with it. When you see the stuff burning down, that's the stuff the feds owned, or that's where the fires start anyway.
My number one enemy is the Department of Education, and I'm so happy that this is one of the priorities for the Trump administration. As an educator, I mean, no other department has done so much harm, okay, since 1979 to generations of kids, than centralizing the role of education, of schooling, into the hands of a bunch of bureaucrats who don't know these kids.
I agree. That's a very good idea of the Trump's administration. And now we have exactly 7 minutes for the questions from the public.
So, are there any questions? Okay, I'm coming. Yeah. Please.
I am Ronald. So I would like to ask, okay, I think it was Bernie Sanders who, during the last election, said that okay, they was to put like Denmark and the Nordic countries as these super social democracies, but then they came and they say, no, we are a free market economy. And in fact, Denmark is a very peculiar place in that it's like they show it works. They have social welfare, which is, I think, the biggest promise, weapon that the state says, no, only if there is a state we can have a social welfare. You alone, you cannot do. You will see for your own, but you will not contribute to the other. In that, they have low taxes, but they use the violence on the state on every turn they can. And also, on that sense, which could be the good example? Because I see like, that going, okay, democracy, well, socialism going towards communism, but okay, in a good state. But the thing about liberalism, how you would put a paradise of a liberal country that people say, oh my God, I would like to live there, like Denmark or Sweden. Yeah, thank you.
In the United States, a lot of people on the left remember Sweden in the 1970s, when it really was much more statist. But that was actually a smaller part of its history than since. They had school choice, radical school choice, before most other people did. So while they spend too much money and taxes are still too high, it's much less regulated in many ways and more open and competitive than a lot of other countries. So it's a surprise to most people, because the reaction when the Democrat says we should be like Sweden, the Republican, if they've read more about Sweden, says, I have a whole list of departments you're going to have to get rid of over here if we could be more like Sweden. And yet, at the same time, the spending is still awfully high.
If I understand the question correctly, what would be my dream of a libertarian political system?
Yeah,
Do we have anything from real experience in history? And I would say from the 20th century, that would be Hong Kong, while it was still British before the Chinese Communist Party took over. And even better than that, I would say the United States in the first 100 years after the Constitution, because at that time, we had zero federal, what we call regulations. I think that's a terrible word to use. It's restrictions. Regulations means to make it regular, to make it free. And so we had a century of no federal regulation. I want to go back to that, prior to 1887.
Okay. Next question? Yeah, okay. If you...
Can I have some time?
Yeah, okay, so here, coming.
1 or 2 weeks ago, I was talking with my left-wing friends about free market versus socialism. And she told me that free market is terrible because her cousin lives in USA and she knows how it looks like. And she told that it is not a good idea. And before she finished, she told me that her cousin, as I thought, she lived in, and her cousin came back from USA to Poland. And she told that her cousin lived in California. Exactly. So what should I to reply to her?
Just tell your friend she hasn't really seen free markets. Okay, California is the worst, probably, of all the states in the Union. Shortly after that are probably New York and Illinois. If they want to see more freedom, economic freedom, they should go to places like Florida, Texas, but definitely not California. People are escaping from California because they think of it as socialism.
One of the things, because of federal in the United States, you can compare different states and where they differ. New York, Florida. There are now more people living in Florida than New York, which is about 2.5 million more in Florida than New York. When I was growing up, Florida is where they had cows and alligators. Now, enough people have moved there that it's bigger than New York State. New York spends $230 billion on its state government. Our friends in Florida, 115, half. Half as much per capita. And you go, what are they missing? Well, that's the interesting part. They both have roads, they both have schools. That, make the list of things that you would want. And by the way, people move from New York to Florida. It's not like, oh, they've got these wonderful services in New York, I think I'll move there. So double the cost. What you get are more government employees. They work fewer hours, fewer days, fewer years. They have benefits beyond anything that normal people get, and the pensions are. That's what you get for twice the pay, twice the cost, and an income tax. There's no income tax in Florida. So that you can compare the difference between what works and what doesn't, what costs what, and what costs twice as much.
Okay, so this will be the last question. So I encourage you to take this. Are there anyone? Here.
Yeah. Maybe I don't need it. So my question is especially for Mr. Bagus. So you talked about how EU, you think is supposed to be a trade agreement as in the past, but even when it was created, it was always a political project. It was never supposed to be just a trade agreement. even at the start, it was also to be a military pact and other things. So my question is, if not the EU, who will protect us as citizens from the state tyranny, from the tyranny of our state, or from other states like Russia taking over, as we see in Hungary, in Romania? If not for EU, there would be no free market, no free citizens, just socialism and central planning.
Okay, what I wanted to say is that the original idea for Europe, or an alternative idea for Europe, was to have free trade, or that there are basically two visions for Europe. In my book, The Tragedy of the Euro, I start with two visions for Europe. One is the socialist, centralist one, where you want to have Europe as a fortress, like fortress to the outside, protectionist to the outside, and interventionist to the inside. Everything is centralized. In Brussels, the national states give up their sovereignty. They have no competition anymore. And the other vision is to have a free Europe of independent states that have free trade, and where the most important value is liberty, because the value of liberty was developed in a Europe of thousands of independent sovereign entities with political competition. If you look at the Eurasian continent, Europe is just at the outside there. There's a huge China, Russia, and so on. These were centralized empires, where everything was centralized, with the empire who was also the religious authority. This meant that there was no individual liberty, because there was no way to go. If in Europe, with these thousands of independent entities, some law was too oppressive, well, individuals and companies, they would go a few miles to the next. So what made Europe leader economically, culturally, philosophically, scientifically was this competition. This was the reason why the Industrial Revolution started in Europe, and it was the first continent that overcame mass poverty. So this is the European idea. So to go back to this is going back to the European root. The European Union is make Europe like China, so it's actually an Asian idea. So they always say to people who don't want more centralization, you're anti-European. No, it's the opposite. The European Union is an anti-European idea. What made Europe great, make Europe great again. That is going back to liberty and political competition. And then, of course, you can have defense alliances. You can have defense alliances between independent states to defend yourselves. But again, I think the ideal would be to get ultimately rid of the state, because there's no way that you can limit the state. All attempts have been shown that it's an utopian failure to think that you can limit the size of the state with constitutions and so on. I mean, the American institution is a case in point. Maybe it was for 100 years that more or less it restricted the growth of the state, even though there we had a civil war, which was kind of disastrous, no? But it has expanded tremendously, even though there was checks and balances on constitution and so on. Once you have this virus, the state, it starts to grow. So there's no way to limit it. As I said, it cannot deliver what it promises, because it doesn't have the knowledge to do so. Everything that can be provided in all goods and services can be provided by the free market. This has been shown by economic science. There's nothing that we need the state for, and it's immoral. So ultimately, we can get we should get rid of the state, but the first step would be go to smaller political units that are in political competition with them, like have 10,000 of Liechtensteins in Europe, for instance. And then we would approximate this, because obviously this cannot be done in one day, this transition period. And this also that we see something which we see in Argentina, that we cannot get rid of the central bank in one day. You could, of course, but this may lead to, to social catastrophes, unrest, and so on. So this is actually a very important scientific question, the transformation process. How can we transform statist society, where everyone also got dependent on the drug of the state? Yeah, this is actually like alcoholism, the statism, right? Like a drug. You get dependent on it, and you get used to it. You think that, without the state there would be no education, there would be no roads, there would be no healthcare, and so on. You cannot imagine a free world anymore. Yeah, so it's very difficult it's more difficult to get people away from the drug of the state than to get people away from heroin or cocaine or so on. So it's much more difficult. So it's a very difficult task, and scientifically we have to look on ways to do it in a orderly way, so to speak.
I fully agree. Small is beautiful. Okay, don't ask for more centralization. Don't ask for more bureaucrats at the top level of the European Union. Ask for decentralization. I would recommend the book that I helped to edit, the Bulgarian translation. Hans Hermann Hoppe, an Austrian economist, very controversial in the United States. It's called Democracy, the God That Failed.
Thank you, gentlemen. We ran out of time, so thank you so much for this discussion, and we welcome the final speech of Mr. Jacek Socha.
So I think you can move to the first row here. We'll finish with, so please stay, we'll finish with final remarks by Jacek Socha, former Minister of Treasury, economist, but what is the most important, speaking about deregulation, someone who is very involved in the current deregulation process. So Mr. Socha, the floor is yours, and you can use the microphone.
Very good evening. Okay, so all those who want to have to leave, please take this in the momentum. Okay, thank you very much for invitation, and I would like to say a few words about the new concept in Poland, which has been created spontaneously 10th of February on the Warsaw Stock Exchange during the presentation of the Prime Minister Donald Tusk about the economy, the very important meeting with the entrepreneurs, and all of a sudden he asked Mr. Brzostka whether he would be interested to carry on the deregulation process. And Rafał said, yes, okay, why not? I think that we would do something for Poland and to make some deregulation. So the name of the project is, and I don't know whether we have anyone who speaks English and doesn't speak Polish, because
yes, we have few people.
We stay few people because there are sometimes the situation that we, that we have that we talk in English and nobody, and really we don't need it. So that we check. So we want to check what to do, and this is the movement which is non-political and not related to any. I should sit because we record.
I think it may be, yeah.
Okay, that would be okay. Very comfortable. Thank you very much. Okay, so that's we check, and we want to check the first what should be done to make some deregulation and the Polish economy more competitive, and the second we check how far we would be able to provide some new ideas and how far the government and all Polish Parliament will consume the proposition provided by entrepreneurs. The first. The second, I think that behind this is Rafał Brzostka, we check, but we cooperate with corporate connections, Leviathan Confederation, Polish Roundtable, and employers of Poland. And the first, which is important, that there is a substantial number of people who are behind this idea we check on the Rafał Brzostka side. So this is the most important, that the work is very quick, fast, and organized. So we have 32 streams which cover all aspects of the economy, all economic aspect of the Polish economy. The second, there are several group of people with a very specific, concrete role. My role is as a coordinator of the WeCheck. It is on the top of the process. So this is my direct relations with the Polish government, who represent the member of the cabinet of Donald Tusk, the chair of the permanent committee within the Chancellery of the Prime Minister, Mr. Maciej Berek. We have every week the very effective meeting during these 2 or 3 hours. We usually go through about 30-40 proposals of the movement WeCheck, and all the times on the we cooperate and work with Berek and also the deputy ministers of the particular minister of interest of the particular proposal. The social movement of WeCheck is in some figures that we have some concept about 15,000 concepts of the regulation. So the artificial intelligence is a part of the game to just to see what is really behind these proposals. And at the moment we sent to the we manage more than 350 proposals, and there are, as I said, several people behind this the concept that WeCheck. And every week on Friday, tomorrow, we have a 3 hours discussion, which concept will be sent to the Prime Minister Chancellery and will be carried on by the Polish government. So the figures about right now we sent 250. About 60-70% are right now in the process with the positive decision. About 70 proposals right now there is on some preparation to the mostly to the Polish Parliament. On Tuesday, during the meeting of the government, 9 proposals will be approved, were approved by the Polish government and prepared for the further work of the regulation. So, what kind of ideas behind this project? I wrote some concepts, and I would try to find this page. Not here. Okay, so what did I write down? Simplification. So this is the first. The second, no particular interest behind the regulation proposals. So we try to, as far as it possible, so wide influence mainly should be concerned as the small and medium size entities. The second, wide influence to the ordinary citizen of Poland. So if anyone wants to do something like the particular interest of the group of people or the group of entities, there is in 99% the response of the steering committee will be no. We don't want to on this stage of the process. The second, of course, when we started the process, we thought that mainly we will try to make some regulations on the secondary regulatory regulations, or maybe some soft law, but in fact, more than 90% our proposals of the regulations will have to be implemented within some parliamentary act. So the process definitely will be slightly longer. Our agreement with the government is that if we provide 100 proposals, that is a start of the 100 days of the government to prepare some changes in law. Then the proposals definitely, as I said, in 90% will be sent to the parliament. What is going on in the parliament? Mostly because of this deregulation idea and concept, in the Polish Parliament Senate has been created the special committee, Deregulation Committee. The chair of this committee is Richard Petru. We think that our proposal will be sent to this committee by the end of May. And as I said, this is a very fast track and sprint. So Rafał Brzoska said that is 3 months of our very intensive work. So in the end of May, Brzoska, as colloquially said, has agreement with his wife that they start the normal life without the project. So, but the concept of project is much further and much wider than we expected. So definitely by the end of May, I think that the WeCheck will send to the Polish government about 500 proposals. So 200 more than we agreed in February. So definitely the government won't be able to decide which proposals will carry on. So I think that we can expect that after the summertime, this next 200 proposals will be discussed with the government September, October. Definitely that is the second stage. We don't want to stop, and all those proposals which are interesting, definitely we will send to the government. The second, I think that we are just under discussion what to do, how to control the government that all the proposals we prepared and all proposals which has been accepted by the governmental committee finally will be voted as parliamentary law, and we have to check whether it's happened, and the second, what's happened, how far the final version of the law is related to the proposal which we sent to the government. So no doubt that as the name of the project is, we will check how far the process and the project will be completed with the ideas which were behind our project. So what can I say? That it is not related to the projects which we had in some past, because as we know, in Poland we have had some MPs or some deregulators, but in fact nothing has happened in future, mostly because of this particular reason, that Rafał Brzoska has created a very wide and very well operated group of people, and this group of people are ready to prepare good proposal for the deregulation. And the second, because of mostly of this and agreement with the Prime Minister, we have a very competitive group of people on the other side. This other side is in some fact, in some aspect, the same side as the WeCheck idea, because in fact there is something which has to be done for Poland of the deregulation. I am the chair of the one steering committee, which is related with the capital market. We made about 20 proposals what has to be done and changed on the capital market in Poland, which is right now in the very delicate saying in the very weak position right now. We don't have IPOs. There is not further development of the capital market. So if any questions, I may answer for the question, but I know that this is a run out of time. So if you are interested to get some more information about the process program we check, please ask me.
Thank you a lot. Thank you for introducing to our audience the Polish efforts in deregulation, and thank you all for joining us tonight. We can keep discussions here, but for those that are participating in our events, see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.